Hello, I'm back. If you've set foot into an office in the last 5 to 10 years, it is very likely you've heard of consultants. The corporate world seems to be crawling with them. There's consultants consulting on all kinds of matters and collecting high fees in the process. I used to be one of them until I realised consulting is sort of a scam. This realization is especially worrying when looking at the growth of the consulting industry in the last 20 years. While the global market for consulting was worth $100 billion in 1999, this has drastically changed over the last 25 years, as today it is valued at well over $1 trillion. Ever since I quit my consulting job at one of the major consulting firms, I've been wanting to make this video. Apart from working in it, I've read tons of books, academic studies, papers, and statistics about the consulting industry, and I'm going to present my results to you in this video. I also spoke to ex-colleagues and listened to what other people had to say about the consulting industry. And the funny thing is, a lot of people agree with me that the relationship our economy has with the consulting industry doesn't really set it up for success. I would even go so far as to say that the consulting industry is actually harming society a lot of the time, as we can, for example, see in the involvement of McKinsey in big scandals like the US opioid crisis or Puerto Rico's debt. Catastrophes which have not only cost the taxpayer loads and loads of money, but also have a high death toll. This is why I think it's so incredibly important that we start talking about what is going on in this industry that usually operates behind closed doors, but has their fingers all over government, as you'll see throughout this video, and where billions of taxpayer money are being spent on and land in the pockets of wealthy partners. But don't just take my word for it. I'll reference everything I say in this video and list all the sources I mentioned down in the description, so feel free to give them a read. I'm also basing it on all of these sources because I can't really tell you about my personal consulting experience or I'll get sued by my previous employers. Lol. And also a quick disclaimer, I don't want to hate on everyone working in the consulting industry. I myself worked in the consulting industry and I get it. It was sold to me, and I guess to everyone entering the consulting industry, as this cool new career path that you can see loads and that is super interesting, especially when you're fresh out of uni. But yeah, in the end it left me really burnt out, not because the work was particularly hard, to be honest, it wasn't, but because all of it felt so pointless. Like this consultant here who posted on the consulting subreddit, he writes that he feels super depressed and anxious as MBB. And a few reasons is why he feels this way is all we do is bullshit and try to upsell clients. But yeah, let's start from the beginning. I'll try my best shot at explaining how the consulting industry works and why I think it is so problematic, or consulting, as my friends and I like to call it nowadays. If you've never really touched points with the consulting world, you might ask yourself, what are consultancies? What does a consultant actually do all day? And who are these consultants? So let's get started with the most famous consulting companies. The most expensive and prestigious consulting companies are the MBB companies. MBB stands for McKinsey, Boston Consulting Group, and Bain. They call themselves strategy consultancies, and they charge the highest fees and are the hardest to get a job at. But they're not the biggest ones. The biggest ones are actually the consulting arms of the big four accountancies, which are KPMG, EY, PwC, and Deloitte. They don't only offer consulting services, but they got big by being the biggest accountancies. But in recent years, consulting has become so lucrative that the revenues of their consulting services have gotten bigger and bigger, overtaking the revenues of the other service lines. But enough about the firms. Who actually are the people working there, and what do they do in their consultant lives all day? Well, the internet is littered with YouTube videos titled Day in the Life of a Consultant. All of them basically just showcase the morning routines and busy meeting-packed schedules of these management consultants, and all of them seem to be very young, in their 20s. And also, none of these videos will actually tell you what the consultant does all day, because the companies are always quite secretive about the work they're doing and make them sign NDAs. So when one Googles the definition of a consultant, this is what you get. A consultant is an experienced professional with a broad and in-depth knowledge of a particular subject matter who advises clients. So one would expect that consultants are really expert people in their subject matter. But wait a second, and they're really young. How have they all managed to become experts so quickly? It's just usually not the case that they're real experts. I think explaining the hierarchies of how consultancies work will explain this phenomenon. And yes, all of the big consulting companies operate roughly in this way. So this is a hierarchy pyramid that I drew up, and at the top of it are the partners. These people actually do have special knowledge in their fields. They will secure projects through the network they have and promise solutions to business and government leaders. Next come the managers. They will usually assemble a team consisting of themselves and a couple of consultants. And the consultants are the ones who will end up doing the actual work. Depending on the company, these might also be called associates or analysts or whatever. But for simplicity's sake, I'll just refer to all of them as consultants. Also, there's junior consultants, which are interns usually, or between degrees or something. And there's senior consultants who are a bit further up the career ladder, but I'll just refer to all of them as consultants. Usually you become a consultant by having a university degree, a bachelor's or a master's degree, but the narrative that they're experts in their fields is usually wrong. The partner at the top is usually an expert in their field, but they rarely spend time helping the client. They usually will spend their time looking for new projects and new engagements and promising high-level executives and government leaders that they will deliver these amazing results. And what the consultants usually do is prepare fancy PowerPoints to help the partners secure these deals, and the consultants will usually also end up doing the work. So the reason this works this way is that the partner can grab as many projects and engagements as possible and make loads of sales essentially, and have enough free time for that, while the consultants will be doing the actual work and the partner will oversee it. Okay, so all of these work together to make the ultimate consulting gig work. So let's look at this for an example. For example, COVID in 2020, which was obviously quite unsettling for many business and governments, and they needed help in managing the pandemic. So who did they turn to? Consultancies, of course. And I don't have a problem with businesses spending loads and loads on consulting services because it's the private sector. They can make their own choices. But I do have a big issue with how much governments spend on consulting services, as we'll see in this example. So when the pandemic hit, McKinsey, as well as other consultancies, of course, sprang into sales mode, deploying its partners across the country to seek contracts, as there was a lot of money to be made in a situation like this. The question remains if the young MBAs, an MBA is a Master's of Business Administration, also going to uni to study management is a topic for a whole video in itself. But usually young MBAs fresh out of uni are a bunch of 20-something-year-olds, which were subsequently then deployed on the various pandemic-related projects. And yeah, the question remains if these 20-something-year-olds really had expertise in the area of global pandemics, and if they were worth the $100 million McKinsey charged US taxpayers for them. And that was only in the first 4 months of the pandemic. The same scenario basically happened everywhere. In the UK, the government handed Deloitte £275 million for pandemic-related consulting, like the Test and Trace programme, that even though ended up being a complete disaster, earned Deloitte roughly $1 million a day. Marianna Mazzucato and Rosie Collington, who wrote this amazing book called The Big Con, How the Consulting Industry Weakens Our Businesses, Infantilizes Our Governments, and Warps Our Economies, interviewed a government employee who was working with the Deloitte consultants during the pandemic. The impression I had was that the organisation stood up so many new teams all at once, so there was always someone new wanting to talk to you about some new thing that was upcoming, but they often didn't even know what they were asking for. It just seemed like every project had loads of wandering Deloitte people. And it strikes me that the sheer volume of them that were around created the situation of these zombie emails just arriving all the time, asking really basic questions that we had to respond to, taking our attention away from actual work. So yeah, and this cost the taxpayer $1 million a day. Another example is the German government, who signed contracts worth $100 million with consultancies in the face of the pandemic in 2021. But why do government officials and big businesses even spend so much money on consultants? I mean, in 25 years, you would kind of reckon they realise it's usually just fresh out of uni grads that they're paying rates of $1,000 an hour for, and that it's not the partners with the actual expertise that will be doing the work. This is why Mazzucato and Collington called their book The Big Con. I've been heavily relying on this book throughout my research and would recommend it to anyone who wants to gain an even deeper understanding of the consulting world and wants to know more after watching my video series. Also, this is just the first part. I'll be dropping part 2 and 3 in the next weeks. Anyways, in their book, they explain how consulting most of the time is just one big confidence trick. The book, which has literally an 80-page long bibliography. Also, my copy is really worn out because I've been so heavily relying on it. And I went to a talk of Rosie Collington, who was talking about her book when she visited Vienna. And she even signed my copy because I was fangirling so hard. Honestly, go buy this book, it's amazing. It's incredibly well researched. They list all of their sources and it was like a great starting point for all of my research. And it's full of academic literature. For example, the critical review by Nicola and Debunking stating that consultants act as impression managers seeking to make their clients dependent on the management fads they produce. In other words, the real value of consulting is very difficult to ascertain, and hence consulting is concerned mainly with creating an impression of value. This is why in consulting an excruciating amount of time is spent on convincing potential and existing clients of the legitimacy of their existence. This takes on the form of making the fanciest PowerPoint presentations. Honestly, from my time in consulting, I cannot emphasize how important everyone made the presentation seem. Or as one disappointed entry-level consultant asked on Reddit, is your job basically just making PowerPoint too? Another disheartened entry-level consultant on Reddit asked if all the consulting is bullshit, as him and his senior partners seem to spend most time on making PowerPoints. But I'm getting carried away. There's so many posts like these. Check it out. It's honestly quite amusing. It's actually a place where consultants honestly talk about what they think about their profession. And it did help my mental health a lot, reading that other consultants also thought it was all bullshit. Anyways, another tactic the big consultancies use to generate an impression of expertise and value is assimilating themselves with academia. One example of this is basically labeling their PowerPoint, that is usually filled with information they just found on Google, and mashed it into their corporate colors and labeling it as study. For example, this non-peer-reviewed document called EY Venture Capital Study 2022 that doesn't list any sources, bibliography, or anything of the likes. But adopting the terms and language isn't the only tactic consultancies use to seem more academic and knowledgeable. For example, both Deloitte and Capgemini have founded an institution called Deloitte University and Capgemini University, which despite their names are not really universities. You can't earn any degrees there. These are just places where consultants go to receive so-called upskillings on how to make better PowerPoints and how to sell more consulting contracts. Begs the question, why the fuck are these places called universities? Another thing consultancies do to convince business and government leaders of their legitimacy and that they're experts of some sorts is publishing journals and publications. McKinsey, for example, founded McKinsey Quarterly. That name sounds awfully similar to academically highly valued and peer-reviewed publications such as the Quarterly Journal of Economics. But unlike its academic counterpart, McKinsey Quarterly is not peer-reviewed at all. I also went through the trouble of reading through the latest issue of McKinsey Quarterly, and my overall impression was that not only did they barely list any sources, nor did it have a bibliography, but they made up for that with a pretty layout. Another factor contributing to the consultants' impression management and their air of professionalism is their dress code. YouTube, Reddit, and other forums are full of what to wear as a consultant so you can adequately blend in. And even the consultancies publish articles themselves to make sure the uni grads they hire are well disguised as industry expert consultants. But back to the question, why the fuck are people hiring them? Isn't the jig up by now? A lot of consultants aren't even sure themselves, with one consultant asking on Reddit, why do clients still buy into our bullshit? And of course, people hiring consultants aren't stupid, but they're most likely quite stressed about work, and the idea of having an expert come in and do all the work for them obviously sounds quite promising. I mean, honestly, if someone came in and did this YouTube video for me and I could take all the credit for it, fuck yeah, I'd do it. If things go wrong, isn't it great to be able to blame it on someone else and just say, oh, the consultants did that, it's not my fault? And this is especially true for layoffs. When shareholders want more profit, they need to slash the operating costs of a company. And that a lot of the time happens through layoffs. Now, no CEO wants to take the blame for layoffs and be labeled as a greedy CEO who doesn't care about their workforce. CEOs are usually people who'll make posts about how they are crying on LinkedIn because they have to let someone go. If a CEO comes in, lays off a bunch of people and says, oh yeah, McKinsey said we have to do this to save the company, obviously the blame is shifted. And yeah, shifting the blame is just amazing if you just don't want to take the responsibility for your actions. And that is another big reason consultants are hired. As an Accenture consultant on Fishbowl put it, companies are paying $600+ an hour for fresh MBAs with zero industry knowledge. You do whatever it takes for them to sign the next statement of work. It would be stupid to think that consultants are hired for their expertise and technical skills as they almost never deliver the work that's worth the excessive hourly rates they charge. These extremely high hourly rates usually do not stem from the possession of scarce, valuable knowledge assets, but from possessing the means to create an impression of value. Let's take a look at this for another example. This email is between Andre Dewar, the managing partner for the Miami office of McKinsey, and Jennifer Moon, who served as budget director for Miami at the time she received this email during the COVID pandemic. As you can see, the proposal is littered with buzzwords like variations on the word analysis or COVID best practices 3 months after the pandemic outbreak, a time where there definitely could not have been so-called best practices yet. And the prices Mr. Andre Dewar wanted to charge the Miami government for a so-called engagement manager, which is just a manager, and a consultant, and whatever COVID is $125,000 a week, which, assuming a 40-hour work week, which are typically assumed on engagement, $3,125 per hour. And that's the discount price compared to the $160K they say their 2-people team is worth. That's a very good yearly salary in most industries for making dashboards. But how is it possible that McKinsey and other consultancies have their fingers all in government? Because the pandemic wasn't the only example. Consultants have worked on loads of government engagements. Another lesser-known story is the building of the new Karolinska Hospital in Sweden, which was overseen by the Boston Consulting Group after they pitched their super glossy, value-based healthcare concept to politicians. The end result was severe operational failures, staff departures, and delay in critical medical treatments, leading to patient deaths, and an insane cost overrun, leaving the anticipated bill at $5.8 billion, which was 5-fold the amount of the original budget that was in the end carried by the Swedish taxpayer. Also, to compare, the world's tallest building, the Burj Khalifa, only cost $1.5 billion to build. And after all of this, BCG still had the audacity to bill a Swedish taxpayer £22 million. So yeah, I'll get into more of the scandals and the scams of the consulting industry. So in the next part of the series, I'll get to how governments have become so hollowed out through the rise of neoliberalism and the austerity measures that have led to the outsourcing of these critical tasks ever since the Thatcher and Reagan era. Also, I'll go into the details of all these consulting scams, as well as why people even want to work in consulting, and more worrying developments of the consulting industry. So make sure to subscribe to the channel and activate the notifications so you don't miss out on the next part. See you next week. Bye.